Welcome to Behind the Mic with Mr. Grant Gregory. With special guest, Doug E. Hughes.
G'day YouTube, it's me, Mr. Grant Gregory, back again for the very first episode of Behind the Mic 2025, and this one is off to a banger. I've got if I say the word a career professional, I think that wouldn't do him any justice. You've probably seen him in his most recent role as the Man in Yellow on the hit TV series From. I'd like to welcome my very special guest, Doug E. Hughes. How you doing, my friend?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I'm super happy to be talking to you, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to communicate with someone from one of my favorite shows, and also from across the world.
Happy to be here.
Alrighty, so let's get into it.
Okay.
You've been as I stated at the beginning a professional career actor. You've been an actor, a singer, a writer, a cyclist, a curler, a juggler, a skater. Do you ever take a break?
Oh, I have way more time on my hands than most people realize. In fact, if I had to list the biggest frustration I've had in this career, it's just not getting to do it as much as I would like. I mean, there have been times throughout my career where I was very busy and very happy to be so, but that's not always been the case. I was just telling someone earlier today on Facebook that these are old figures, but I imagine they're still fairly accurate. I remember reading somewhere years ago that the average unemployment rate in theater in this country for performers was approximately 85%. So for us, the idea of being unemployed is like, back to normal.
Well, fair enough.
And it's one of the reasons why I'm very glad that my writing partner asked me to start writing with her, because having that second career accomplished two things. Number one, it helped keep food on the table when there wasn't much acting work around, and it also gave us another creative outlet. And the great thing about writing is you don't have to wait for somebody to hire you. You can do it whenever you want.
Yeah.
So we've both had other careers. We both started as actors. She's now a director when she works, but our understanding, because we were always writing on spec, no one was paying us. Our understanding was if either of us had a job, that would take precedence over the writing. And so we would do it when we were both free. And that sort of cut down on our output because, you can't do as much when you have two careers at the same time. But it seemed to be a very good way for us to work. It's worked out well in the long run.
That is awesome to hear. Well, people say that true art comes from when you put two pieces together and they become greater than the sum of the whole. Is this an accurate portrayal of you and Marcia Kash's work life together?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't think of a better example of, a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts, because we just lucked out. I mean, when we wrote the first play together, she actually started writing it with someone else, and then she was living in Edmonton at the time with her husband. And then they moved back to Toronto, and so she and her partner there had to split up, and they did so with the understanding that if either one of them wanted to continue with the piece, they could. Well, the other woman put it down. She never looked at it again. And Mars was trying to write it on her own, and then she just wasn't making any headway. So one night the two of us were out for coffee, and I had done bits of writing. When we had done shows together, I would do like parodies of the songs in the musicals that we did together. And she did a little late night award ceremony one night after one of our performances. And so I wrote a lot of stuff for that. So I guess she thought of me when she thought of a writing partner. And she said to me, "Look, I've got this play I've been trying to work on my own, and I'm just not getting anywhere. Would you be interested in working with me?" And I said, "Well, let me see what you've got." And so she gave me the first draft. She had about 30 pages of stuff, and I read through it, and I said, "Yeah, I think we could do something with this." And so we started working on it, and 6 months later I had a first draft, and by the end of the year I had a second draft, and early the next year I had a third draft, and then it got produced, and then it got published, and we were like, well, that went well, let's do that again, and it sort of went from there.
So how did it feel the first time that you, once it was all done, you had Who's Underwear, just like then you're like, it's done. What was that feeling like?
Over the moon. I mean, just getting produced in the first place was so exciting, but no sooner did it open when Marcia suggested to me, let's send it to Samuel French and see if they'll produce it or if they'll publish it. And I thought, oh yeah, sure, like that's going to happen. But I said, yeah, okay, fine, and it was an easy thing to submit it to them. But I figured we'll probably hear from him in 6 to 9 months or something like that. They called us 2 weeks later. The original run of Whose Underwear was still on when we learned that we had been published. And that just blew the two of us away, I remember when we got our copies in the mail, they send you 10 copies, each of the authors get 10 copies, right? And I was on the streetcar one day on the way to my day job selling shoes in a downtown mall in Richmond, in Toronto. And I'm looking at this thing. And I was thinking of all the times I'd been in rehearsal as an actor holding one of these in my hand. And it never occurred to me to look at the name on the front and picture that person on their way to their job selling shoes somewhere. But that was the case, I mean, we were always working around day jobs and stuff like that, at least initially. I mean, after several years, we finally got to the point where between our acting and our directing careers and our writing careers, we were able to keep ourselves busy, But yeah, the fact that, I mean, had you told us back then when we wrote that first play that 30 odd years later we'd still be doing it, I don't think either of us would have believed you, But we ended up being a really great match. It was just the luck of the draw, I think part of that is we have slightly different skill sets. She moved into directing for a reason, She tends to think more sort of big picture and more conceptually than I do. I'm much more, I always view it from the actor's point of view. So for me, it's all the moment to moment stuff. And those two different skills, mesh together very well when you're writing together. So there's that. We have very similar senses of humor, I think. And yeah, like I say, I think we just lucked out that we've managed to keep it together all this time. I mean, it is a difficult relationship to maintain. It's a very intimate relationship, a long-term relationship. And like any relationship of that nature, it requires a lot of effort, And yeah, when we started out, we had to work through a lot of stuff like any intense relationship. And I remember once we were writing here at my place, sitting beside each other in front of the computer, kind of bickering at each other. And she looked at me at one point, she said, you know what? This relationship is exactly like a marriage. Yeah, without any sex. And she said, yeah, like I said, it's exactly like
a marriage. Exactly like a marriage. And what, you've done 6 altogether so far? Is that correct?
Yeah. In fact, we're working on number 7 right now, and we just made arrangements today. We're having a reading of it here in Toronto early next month.
Oh, that's awesome. Because your last one was Deadline, is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So, working with the Samuel French to get everything published, was that something that you always wanted to do? Was that just, or was it just let's just see if it happens, or was that always the goal?
Oh, no. In fact, Marcia was the one that suggested it, and my first thought was, "Are you out of your mind? Like, you seriously think they're going to consider this thing?" So, nobody was more surprised than me when they called us 2 weeks later and said, "Okay." I mean, when we wrote the first one, the objective was just to see if we could write a play. Even getting it produced. I mean, yes, obviously we wanted to do that, but that was kind of a secondary goal. The primary goal was just to see if we could write something that, that could stand on its own 2 feet.
Could you have imagined that when you first sat down to do it, that your collaboration as a team would span over multiple countries, multiple languages, and having play like 300 plus plays all around the world? Like,
No,
from the perspective of a creative person, what does that do? Do you define that as success?
Yeah, I mean, there are degrees of success. The thing you have to bear in mind about those numbers is, they sound really great when you trot them all out in one sentence like that. But this has been spaced over 30 odd years, and so the success, if you will, came incrementally and gradually over all that time. And so every time a new success point would happen, yes, we'd be very excited about it. But then you get over that one, and you move on and you become accustomed to the new reality. And so to look back now and see all of that, it's like, yeah, this looks pretty impressive when you put it on a piece of paper, but it didn't feel that way while we were doing it. We were just, in the trenches slogging away.
More importantly, are you still big news in Poland?
We are. We have a national tour of our first play, Whose Underwear. It's called Damski Business in this production.
I was going to try and pronounce it, but I'm just like, it was like Damski Business. I didn't know how to pronounce it, so I was just waiting for you to say it.
Well, business, it's spelled differently, but it's pronounced the same as in English. And
Same way,
Damski
yeah.
is women's. The first production of Hughes in Poland had a different translation for the title. It was called Interes Życia, which is much more of a mouthful.
Oh, that's easy to say, yeah.
It loosely translates as women's business, but it
Women's
translates
business.
as the same thing,
Okay.
but slightly
Yeah.
double entendre kind of overtone in Polish, apparently.
No,
But
I
yeah,
like that.
5 productions now in 3 different theaters in Poland.
That's amazing.
4, including this tour, pardon me. This tour started back in the fall of 2023, and we're now booked up until the end of this year, it looks like. It's still going
That's
around.
cool.
You know, yeah.
Do you still have any shows over in China?
There's an annual production of our second play, which is a murder mystery. It's called A Party to Murder. They do it every year at Halloween because that's the period where the play is set. It's about a murder mystery game that gets played on Halloween night. And so they've been doing it there now in Shanghai for, I think this was the 14th year this year. And a few years ago, the two of us went over to China because we had 2 productions going on at the same time. There was a company in Shenzhen, which is down near Hong Kong, doing the same play at the same time. So we got to go over and see those.
Did you both get to see them? Or was that when Marcia hurt herself?
That's when she broke her leg. Yeah.
Yeah.
She broke her knee, actually. It happened our first day in Shanghai.
That's nuts. What is it about acting, whether it's theatre, TV, voiceover work? What is it that drew you to it? What is it that you love so much about it?
You know, I always find this question so difficult to answer because the desire to do this goes back so far. Like, it happened so early in my life. And it's not like I woke up, you know, when I was 2 or 3 years old and went, I want to be an actor. It wasn't that at all. It was, I think when I saw performers doing whatever, whether it was listening to music or watching people on TV or going to the movies, there was this assumption that I was going to be a part of this somehow. I can't think of a better way to explain it, you know? And the first time in school when I had an opportunity to be in a play, of course I'm going to be in it. That was just a foregone conclusion as far as I was concerned. No idea where that came from. I mean, my family has no theatrical tradition whatsoever. It just, I don't know. Can't say.
Like, I guess some people say that there's a drive and they don't know where it comes from. Would that be a safe assumption? It's just, you just knew?
Yeah, I can say this. By the time I left grade school, I knew that I was going to make this my career. I was also very serious about hockey when I was a kid, and I was still playing hockey in junior high. And the two things were kind of a bit of a juggling act, but hockey was really starting to interfere with my school. And it's also a very expensive sport, and it was, straining the family finances. So before I went into high school, my dad said, I think it's time to hang up the skates. And I said, yeah, okay. But before I even got to high school, I knew that I was going to be going to theater school after I graduated. And that's what I did.
Well, being such a hockey fan, are you still a big Blackhawks fan? Are you still as avid as always?
Yes, indeed.
So I do have a question. I do have a question for you. It is hockey related. So who is the greatest goaltender of all time in the NHL, and why is it Glenn Hall?
Well, he was a genius. They called him Mr. Goalie. That was his epithet when he played, I actually got the chance to meet him back in 1981. I was doing a school tour in Saskatchewan in the spring of that year, and we got to Humboldt, Saskatchewan, which is where he grew up. And I was sitting in the bar one night, and across the street, I saw a sign that said Glen Hall Recreational Park. And you have to understand, this guy was my hero. I grew up wanting to be Glen Hall when I got into the NHL, which I figured was an inevitability. And so I was so excited. And I said to somebody, is Glen Hall from here? And one of the guys at the bar said, yeah, he grew up here, but he doesn't live here anymore. He lives in Stony Plain. And I said, great, where's that? And he said, it's just outside of Edmonton. Well, 6 months later, I happened to be in Edmonton. So I thought, what the hell? I got out the phone book, found him in the phone book, called him up. And this was a good 10 or 12 years after about 10 years after he had retired from playing. He was still active in hockey. I think he was a goalie coach at the time for the Calgary Flames. But he was a farmer. That's what he did, and all through his hockey career, he was a farmer. In fact, he hated going to training camp. And I'd heard this story, and when I finally got to meet him, because I called him and I said, "Hi, Glenn, this is me. I'm a big fan of yours. I'm here in town. I think it would be really great if we could meet." And he said to me, "Oh, okay. Well, I'm coming into town on Thursday. Why don't I pick you up and we'll go have a coffee?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding?" I said, "Awesome." So that's what he did. He picked me up in his pickup truck, and we went to this Greasy Spoon on White Avenue and got some coffee and donuts. And he sat and told me stories for an hour. And one of them was, I asked him to confirm all these things that I'd heard about him. One being that he hated training camp and he never went. And he said, "Yeah, that's true." And apparently the scenario was training camp would start and he wouldn't be there. And they'd finally call him up and they'd say, "Glenn, where the hell are you? Training camp started." And he'd say, "I'm painting my barn." And they said, "Well, when are you going to be done that?" And he'd say, "When's the first exhibition game?" They'd say, "Saturday night." He says, "Okay, I'll be in Chicago on Friday." And that was it. And he got so nervous before every game that he threw up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
True
that's a
story.
common thing with people who, especially in sports, and it always tends to be the people who are really top tier. It's like they know that everything rides on them, especially being like the goaltender or goalkeeper, depending on however you want to say it. Yeah, like I think that's an awesome story. Like that is so cool just to be able to do. I mean, now you calling up someone, you'd probably get charged with stalking, but
Exactly.
it would be a little bit different back then.
It was a different time, indeed. I mean, and even then, I fully expected him to hang up on me, but he
Yeah.
was he was really great about the whole thing.
Yeah, and for my younger viewers, a phone book it was a book that people would print up with everyone's number in it. Yeah, there was no search button, there was no Siri, so
Yeah, that's right. No 411.com.
yeah. So, like, well, we're just talking about hockey and the Blackhawks, and there was an interesting discussion that I was having with a friend of mine. He's a fellow Canadian, loves hockey, doesn't like any of the teams that I like, but that's besides the point. Um, my question is to you: why do you think that the Blackhawks don't get the backlash like, say, the Redskins or the Indians? Do you think it has something to do with honoring a person in real life versus, say, caricatures or something?
Well, you've just answered your own question, and it's an excellent question, and I have a great answer for you because I know the story inside out and backwards.
Okay.
The guy who bought the team that became the Chicago Blackhawks was he grew up in Chicago, and his name's gone right out of my head right now. Uh, Charles McLaughlin, I think that's it. He was the son of a coffee baron in Chicago,
Okay.
very rich family, very well to do, and he grew up. As far as I understand, he grew up fascinated with all things military. And Chief Blackhawk, was an actual guy. He was the war chief of a tribe, the Sauk tribe, Sauk, the Sauk tribe that lived in what is now sort of Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa. And they got screwed they signed a land deal with the government where they basically lost most of their land. And Chief Blackhawk spent most of his life trying to get it back. During the War of 1812, he fought with the British against the Americans. And then when that war ended, he kept fighting for like the next 20 years, trying to reestablish their homeland. The Americans eventually captured him after about 20 years, but the guy was such a brilliant tactician and such a brave warrior that even they had tremendous respect for him. So they threw him in jail. He was there, I think, for a few years. And then some journalist came and interviewed him and wrote what amounted to his autobiography. And it was the first known autobiography of a First Nations person ever, as far as anybody knows. And the book became a sensation, so much so that I don't know who the president was at this time. I think this would have been probably just shy of the Civil War, so somewhere around there. He was let out of prison, and they took him on a kind of promotional tour. And he went around the country and drew huge crowds. He was a big sensation. So McLaughlin found out about this guy, and I assume he probably read the book at some point because Chief Blackhawk became his hero. So much so that when World War I came around, he was in the army. He was a major, and he was the head of an artillery battalion, and he named them the Blackhawks after his hero. And then about 6 years after the end of the war, he bought this hockey team and brought them to Chicago to become part of the NHL, and once again named them after his hero, Chief Blackhawk. And his wife did the first portrait of him that was on the front of their jerseys. So it had nothing to do with race or any of that stuff. Or the fact that he was native or that he was it was none of that. It was, this is my hero, and I want to idolize the guy. kind of be like somebody in New Jersey having a team called the Newark Springsteens, and putting his face on the front of the sweater. So it's quite a different thing. I mean, the problem is now, it's become such a hot button issue that people see the First Nations regalia and they immediately think racism, but there was no racist intent at all. In fact, this is the thing that drives me crazy about McLaughlin. He was like this hyper partisan, this real sort of jingoistic American. And yet his hero was a stated enemy of his country, and even in that environment, he's like, no, he's going on the front of our jerseys. He's my hero. And so
going over the heart. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
All right. We've come to the part of the show that it's my favorite. This is the hot 10 questions, nice and quick. Very simple. I'll ask you a question. First thing that pops into your head, you can say it. It doesn't matter if it's a long answer or a short answer, as long as it's the first thing.
Okay.
All right. Question number 1. What is your favorite bad/guilty pleasure movie?
Oh boy. As a guilty pleasure, I'd have to say The Ninth Configuration.
I don't know that one. I love it because I always hear films. That I've never heard of. So
it's very obscure. It has a cult following. It's a fascinating film, but it's deeply flawed, which is why it's a guilty pleasure. But it's worth a visit. Check it out if you get a chance.
I'll definitely have a look now.
It was written by William Peter Blatty. It was the movie he did after The Exorcist came out.
What would your movie biography title be?
I wrote a novel a few years ago, and it's the title comes up in that novel, A Man of No Importance. It's the name of a musical that I actually did here many years ago. It was a movie that Albert Finney starred in back in 1994, and then it was turned into a musical, and I did a production of it here in 2008 and got to play the Man of No Importance.
Not only that, you got nominated for a Dora Award. Was that correct?
I did, yeah.
Favorite musical instrument?
That's a toss-up from the two that I play, blues harmonica or alto sax. I'm a better harmonicist than I am a sax player. I'm still learning. If
you were in a movie or a play with just one person, who would that person be?
Oh, God. That's so hard to answer. Well, the first answer I had was Jennifer Lawrence. Talk about guilty pleasures. No, but
that's why we do it.
I got to say, I idolize that woman. She is the funniest thing on the planet, and she's so down to earth, quick as a tack. I adore her, and a brilliant actress. So yeah, sure, why not?
And she doesn't hurt that she's pleasant on the eyes either.
Well, that too, yeah.
What's the furthest that you've ever rode your bike in one day?
160 kilometers.
Jesus.
And that was with about 25 kilometers of stuff on the bike too. But I have to be fair. It was flat as a pancake, and I had the wind at my back, which is why I got to do 160 kilometers that day.
That's
Probably the toughest ride I did was about 140 kilometers in the mountains of southwestern U.S.
Have you finally mastered the saxophone yet?
No, not even close. I've been self-taught for the last 15 years, and it's only thanks to this last year, all the stuff that's happened this last year, that's enabled me to get serious about taking lessons. So I'm doing lessons right now, and I'm bound and determined to get good at this thing. But right now, in 2 words, I suck.
What was the best advice that you ever got from your father or mother?
Well, the only advice I ever got from my father, this was the only thing he ever said to me about sex education. He said, "Don't ever bring one home pregnant."
Fair enough.
My father, that was about as good as it got. My mom, I couldn't sum it up in a sentence. Let's just suffice it to say, any of the good advice I got in my life came from my mom. Absolutely.
What's your favorite quote of all time?
I'm drawing a blank. I know. I'll have to answer.
Who said that one? I'm drawing a blank. I like it. Yeah, it's a good quote.
No, I'll have to think about it. Sorry.
All right. Pause for a second. Note from the editor. While Doug was unable to answer the question here in the interview, he was kind enough to actually send me an audio message with his answer.
Grant, I've been thinking about one of the questions you asked that I was unable to answer, the one about a favorite quote. And I wouldn't say this was necessarily my favorite one, but it's one that I think is particularly apropos for the followers of From. It's attributed to Freud, although he never actually said it. And the quote is, "Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar." So I offer that to you for what it's worth.
What's one country that you haven't visited, but you still would really like to?
Oh, there are so many. Australia being one of them. Australia and New Zealand. In fact, I was going to do a bike tour of New Zealand the last year that I was at Shaw, as soon as the season ended. And then I found out it was the last season I was at Shaw, and that was the end of that trip.
I like to end the questions with this one. What makes Doug smile?
Oh, too many things to count. Oh. Yeah. Actually, I think one of the things that gratifies me most is simply amusing people. If I can get somebody else to smile, if I can get them to laugh, there's a huge payoff for me.
I love that. That's a great answer. All right, well, there we go. That was our 10 hot questions designed to get the brain flowing and just have a little bit of fun with it. So, all right, we'll bring it back to a little bit more of your earlier life. So there are pivotal points in everyone's life that seems to change or shape the future. Tell me the story about how you were 8 days away from quitting acting while you were cleaning your beer making equipment and the phone rang.
Okay. It's a long story. I'll try and give you the short version. The first 15, excuse me, the first 15 years of my career, I auditioned for the Shaw Festival, I think about 9 or 10 times. And
Was that with Chris Newton?
Christopher Newton, yeah. He was the artistic director that entire period. And every year I'd go in and I'd audition and I'd do my pieces, and he'd always say, "You have any questions?" And I never did. So I'd say, "No." And he'd say, "All right." And off I'd go. Well, after about 9 or 10, I guess it was about the 9th time, my second last audition, he asked me that question, and I said, "Yeah." Or he asked me, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got a question, Chris. Why am I here?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, Jesus, you've seen me like 9, 10 times over the last 15 years. I figured if you liked me, you would have hired me by now. But if you didn't like me, you wouldn't keep bringing me in. So what am I doing here?" And he said, "It's a very good question, and I've got an answer." And then he launched into this thing about how every year he would do these auditions. He'd go across the country. He'd see 600 actors, and he might have places for, somewhere between 6 and a dozen of them. So there were lots of actors whose work he really enjoyed, but he never had anything to offer them in any given year. And he said, "And I like to keep track of those people. And that's why you're here." And I went, "Oh, okay, thank you." Now, had he not told me that, the following year, I probably wouldn't have asked for another audition. I just would have sent in a resume and said, "Please keep me in mind." And the next year turned out to be like the year from hell when I had no work at all. And in fact, things got so bad that on my birthday, I walked into my agent's office and I said, "That's it. I'm getting out. I'm throwing in the towel." And they're like, "No, you can't do that." And I said, "Well, who are we kidding? How much work have I done as an actor this year? I might as well call myself a submarine commander for all the practical application it has to my daily life." And they said, "Well, look, give us 6 months. We'll turn things around." I said, "All right, February 16th, mark it on the calendar. If nothing's changed by then, I'm out of here." And I said, "Okay." Now, I had already submitted to Shaw for an audition by the time that conversation happened, and I got another audition, and I went in to see him. This would have been, I think, probably about November of that year. And I got there and I thought, I wonder if I should tell him. And I thought, no, don't do that. It's going to sound like, give me a job or I'll blow my brains out. So I thought that's bad form. So I went in, I did my pieces. And this year he didn't say, "Do you have any questions?" He said, "So how's your year been?" I said, "Oh, don't get me started. This has been the worst year of my career." And we started commiserating about that. He said, "Yes, I'm hearing that from a lot of people." I said, "Well, times are tough, So anyway, we talked about this for a bit. And I said to him, "Chris, I wasn't going to tell you this, but it's kind of germane to the conversation. This is probably the last time you're going to be seeing me." And he looked at me and he said, "I'm very disturbed to hear that." And I thought, well, then give me a fucking job. Anyway, I left the audition and I had this sort of vague impression that maybe that was the right thing to do. Anyway, a couple of months go by. It's now early 1995, January, and I'm hearing rumblings that offers are going out from Shaw. And there was nothing else on the horizon. It's the slowest time of the year. So towards the end of the month, I called my agents and I said, "Can you just call down there and see if I'm being considered?" And they said, "Sure." They called back a couple hours later and they said, no, nobody's heard your name. And I thought, well, I guess that's it. So then we come to February 8th, the momentous day, 8 days before the end of my career. And I just made a batch of homemade beer and I was cleaning out the equipment and I'm watching all this sludge going down the sink. And I'm thinking to myself, that's the perfect metaphor for my career right there. I might as well face it. I will never work again. Ring! Go upstairs, pick up the phone, and it's the Shaw Festival calling to offer me the season.
That's insane.
Put the phone down. It's like, you. I mean, what are they like? It was like literally the period was forming on the end of that sentence as it went through my head, and that's when the phone rang. It could not get more cosmic than that. So I took it as a sign from God that I was supposed to be there. Now, this was just for one season, of course. You only get an offer for a season at a time, and I ended up sticking around for 13 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, lucky you didn't say 5 months.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's just say that scenario didn't happen. Where would you have seen yourself?
No idea at all. I even after having 6 months to think about it, I had no clue what I was going to do. I thought about maybe going back to school, getting a degree in the life sciences and trying to help save the planet. But practically speaking, that would have been close to impossible just because of what it would have cost. How could I fund it? But beyond that, I really had no idea. I just want to say hello from the little man in yellow.
Nice. Yeah, sorry, I'm eyeing me off earlier, and I thought his head turned a little bit, so I wasn't too sure.
Oh, he's keeping an eye on things. Don't you worry.
Safe to say that Chris Newton did play a pivotal point in your career.
He did indeed.
Well, I've heard that from a lot of people within the theatre community, especially up there.
He was like an ideal choice to run that place. He was there for 23 years, and for good reason. I mean, he had all the skills to be an excellent theater administrator. He was a gifted director. I worked with him on a number of shows. I always loved working with him because he had been an actor himself, and he really understood actors in a way that not necessarily all directors do. He was one of the kindest people I ever knew, one of the most loyal people I ever knew, almost to a fault. Just an all-around lovely guy. Yeah,
it's sad to hear about his passing a few years ago. So.
Indeed.
All right, let's move it on to some of your work. So your work explores nuance, social and emotional themes. How do you approach writing a challenging subject in a way that remains both entertaining and thought-provoking, especially when you're doing comedy?
Well, it's funny. With all of our plays, I think that the comedy has come first. Even the mysteries, although they're mysteries, there's always an element of comedy. And in some cases, I mean, it's not that we set out to tell stories with a message necessarily, but by the same token, we didn't want them just to be fluff. We didn't want the comedies not to be about anything. For example, Who's Underwear? I'll tell you where it came from, where the original idea came from. Marcia was doing a farce in Edmonton that her husband had directed. He was the artistic director of the theater company there. And I can't remember what the farce was, but it was not a particularly good one. So one night the cast was sitting in the bar after a performance complaining about what a piece of shit this play was that they were working on. And somebody piped up and said, well, we've got about 50 years of experience in farce sitting around this table. We could write a better play than this. And everybody else said, yeah, we could. At which point Marce piped up and she said, well, I just want to say this. If we're going to write a farce, every time I'm in one of these damn things, I end up having to run around in my underwear. If we're writing one, the men are going to have to run around in their underwear. And all the women at the table are like, damn straight. So then they started kicking ideas around, like, how do we get a bunch of guys into their underwear? And that's where the idea for Whose Underwear first came from. And it is in many ways a really strong feminist statement because it's about these two women whose husbands have very good jobs, who don't take their wives' little cottage industry very seriously. And little do the husbands know that the wives are on the verge of signing a $5 million international distribution duty, or a deal for their stuff, and that's what the play's all about, and how the husbands learn the hard way that they've been taking these two women for granted. So yeah, it's got a message. The second and third plays, not so much. The second play is very much an Agatha Christie style murder mystery. A Party to Murder. That's the one that shows every year in China. The third one is Too Many Cooks, which is a period piece, which is set in Niagara Falls during Prohibition in the United States back in the 30s. And that was an idea that I came up with because I wanted to try our hands at writing a period comedy. The challenge of writing something that was set in a different time period. The fourth play, Jack of Diamonds, was definitely a message play because both of us had parents who were, getting on in years. Marcia's father wasn't going to be with us for very much longer at that point. And we were very much aware of, the issues around the aged. And I mean, every time we'd go and see one of our plays, the audience was always a sea of blue rinse, So we finally decided maybe instead of writing for these people, we should write a play about them.
About them, yeah.
So the idea with that play is to kind of shoot down a lot of the stereotypical ideas we have about the elderly. We play with that a lot. The next play is Something Fishy, which is kind of political satire, the send-up of political campaigns. And then our most recent play, Deadline, is kind of in ways a little autobiographical. It also has a connection with From, too, in a funny kind of way.
I was going to say, I noticed from the synopsis, so it's the guy is trapped within the play itself. Is that how it works?
It's a pair of writers, actually. They get hired to ghostwrite this play that was being written by someone else, right? And all they have is the first scene to start. And it's a murder mystery, and it's supposed to be opening on Broadway in a few weeks. And so they're under the gun to get this thing ready. So the first thing they do is sit down and read these first 25 pages. So as they describe the set, we see the set appearing behind them. It all takes place on a yacht. And as the characters are introduced, we see the characters appearing on the set. And as they start to read the dialogue, we see the characters mouthing the lines. And eventually the characters take over with their own voices. Yeah. The two of them get up and play a couple of the characters. And when they get to the end of the 25 pages, everything grinds to a halt. All of the other characters freeze. And they look at each other and they go, okay, well, time to hit the computer. And they turn around and their office is gone. And they discover that they're actually on the yacht, that they have somehow found their way into the world of the play. And so it's like, how did we get here and how the hell do we get home? And the guy says, well, we kind of read our way into this. I guess we're going to have to write our way out. And so they proceed to try and solve the mystery from within before they get killed. And that's basically the story.
Yeah, no, I love that concept. Those are the sort of stories and ideas, the ones that are just a little bit out there, has a like a weird element, and then it just seems to be like a regular story. Like it switches genres sort of thing. So
it works on two levels, because the play on the surface is just a straight up murder mystery, but what it really is an allegory about the writing process, and both of those things are sort of happening at the same. You can accept it on either or both levels at the same time. So.
Well, speaking of like your writing process, when you're writing a character that you say you plan to portray, how do you merge your creative freedoms of writing with the practical realities of having to perform that?
Well, we've never actually performed in any of our plays. Like Marcia doesn't perform anymore anyway. She has directed several productions of our plays, but that's not really part of it. I mean, certainly fleshing out the characters is. We have a very specific process that we follow with all of our work. It changes slightly from project to project depending on the genre, but it has to do with sort of starting with the general and then working our way down to the specific. And this is, I mean, for example, first we have an idea for a play. So we'll sit down and just write an outline, like a page outline of what this is all about. And then we'll do a brief sort of point by point plot synopsis that might be 2 or 3 pages long that takes us through the entire story arc. Then we'll do a very detailed plot synopsis, which is, first this happens, which makes that happen, which makes that happen. And that might be, 15 or 20 pages long. And by the time we finish that, we've got a very clear idea of who all these characters are, what the events are. Like the story is very clearly defined. And so by the time we sit down and start writing dialogue, we've already established who all these characters are in great detail, what their journeys are, and we go from there.
That's I love that. I mean, everyone has their own writing process, but I like that. Do you think that helps because you are a team versus doing that by yourself?
Yes, definitely. And the other thing, we were just talking about this today. We were working on our latest play today, and we were talking about the fact that because so many writers we talk to, they're always mystified. They're like, how do you write with somebody else? And I always say to them, how do you not write with somebody else?
Yeah.
I mean, we've both written things on our own as well. And, we can do that too. But it's different with the two of us together. And we were talking about the fact that it has a lot to do with, we both started out as actors. And so the idea of collaborating is we're totally at home with that. We always have been. It's part of the process, And in fact, with Whose Underwear, when we were writing that one, if we couldn't figure out if something was going to work, we would just get up and do it. We'd perform it ourselves. And so that kind of collaboration has always been a part of our working relationship. And it just comes naturally,
I guess help acting out a scene that you're struggling with. I guess it's a good thing that there wasn't like a lovemaking scene that you were struggling with.
No, that's never been a problem. There have been lots of rumors about us, let me tell you. In fact, I remember once we went to visit this casting agent here in Toronto that we both knew quite well after the first play came out and it had been published and there was a lot of buzz about it. And she said to us, the whole world thinks the two of you are screwing. I said, good, tell them we are. We need the publicity.
Oh. Well, you mentioned that you've written stuff in that by yourselves. Will we see another novel with Harry Hardgraves in it?
I don't think so. It depends. I mean, if I had an idea that I really felt I needed to write, yeah, you would, because that's what happened with the first two. I've never really suffered from writer's block because having another career, I would write when I felt like it. I've never been in a position where I actually had to write something, I mean, when Marcia and I make a decision to write together, yes, we commit to working together and all of that. But the whole idea of like just sitting down and not being able to think of anything to write, I've never had that experience because the only time I choose to write is when I have an idea I really want to do,
Yeah.
And so when I got the idea for the first Harry book, Poor Player, I was highly motivated to write that, and I knew that I wanted it to be a series at that point. But when I wrote the first book, I had no idea what the second book was going to be about. And then political events of the time sort of started informing my thought process. And then I got a great idea for the second book. So I was like, boom, sat down and wrote that one as well, But I didn't start that one until, I wasn't spending any time fretting about, oh my God, what's the next book going to be about? I just waited until I got an idea and I went, yep, that'll do. And that's when I wrote that one.
I love the title of the second book.
The Shaming of the
Found Word. True, yeah, I love that.
Well, and the thing is, if you read the book, it's a very apt title because it actually has a lot to do with what happens in the story.
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get myself a hold of a copy. So
well,
I would have loved to have been able to read it. Yeah.
I would be happy to send you PDF copies of both the books if you're interested. Because
absolutely, 100%, absolutely, that'd be great.
I would love to hear your thoughts on them. So yeah, I'll do that for sure.
For sure. Well, okay, let's just say, for instance, if this was to be turned into another form of media, would you prefer it to be a TV series or a movie or a set of movies?
The books?
Yeah.
Oh boy, that's an excellent question. I haven't really thought about that. I think my assumption up until now is if they ever got published and somebody wanted the rights, that it would probably get turned into a film. But actually, the first one's a bit long for a film. And a series might not actually be a bad idea, particularly if they were going to be a series of books.
Yeah.
If things ever got to that point, yeah, I'd be hugely motivated to keep writing them. So who knows, but I don't really see that happening at this point. You never know, but I'd be surprised if it did. I mean, lots of people suggest to me that I go the self-publishing route, but frankly, I would rather stick needles in my eyes. It was hard enough writing the books. I don't want to put myself through that agony as well,
Yeah. Well, then also, like, once you get it somewhere, then some executive or something will go, well, yeah, but let's change it to this. Let's do this. And then all of a sudden it's no longer your story.
Yeah. Well, and if I ever got published and it got bought for a film or for TV, that's going to happen anyway. I would have no control over that,
Yeah, I've seen. I heard a lot of friends have had manuscripts and everything turned into TV shows or pilots, a lot of pilots, and then it was so far removed from the original source material that it was just like it's in name only, basically.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it happens all the time.
Oh, here we go. As someone who's seen the ins and outs of the Canadian film and television world, what do you consider some of the biggest challenges for homegrown talent to quote unquote break through?
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that question, and I'll tell you why. One of the odd things about being in From and having, that be my introduction is that the general assumption in the public out there seems to be that I've had a much better TV and film career than I've had. I mean, for most of my career, with a couple of notable exceptions, I've been a day player, and in fact, that's what I was on From. I was there for one afternoon to shoot one scene. I mean, I already
Well,
knew
made
at
an
that point-
impact. So
Sorry?
they said it definitely made an impact, that one scene. That's for sure.
Well, sure. But I mean, as I keep saying to people, 90% of that work was done before I was even hired to do the job. I mean, when I read the scene, the first thing that went through my head was, well, there's a hell of an entrance.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I sort of feel privileged in that sense that I got handed this gift where it's like, yeah, just get out there, say the lines, don't bump into the furniture, and you'll be fine, But yeah, I mean, I was there for a day. I haven't met the rest of the cast. I've met Ian and Hannah, and that's it. I know a couple of other people because, the theater community and the acting community in Canada is still small enough that happens all the time. I know Deb Grover. I know Cliff Saunders. I think I may have met Liz. Cliff and I spent a year together at Stratford. And we probably got introduced together at a party somewhere, but this was 15 years ago, and I don't remember. I'm hoping to have the two of them over for dinner sometime soon, so we'll get a chance to catch up, But the rest of the cast, never met them, don't know them. It's going to be like the first day of school if they bring me back for next season. So,
Well, how much time do you see yourself spending in Halifax, if you can say?
I have no idea. No idea. Really. I haven't a clue. I mean, I'm assuming that I'm going to be back, but even that's not written in stone. I mean, they may decide to keep the character and get rid of me. You never know,
I heaven forbid. No, we'll protest. Well, like I said, you've seen what the show has become, especially with the fan base, the Fromily, as we like to be called.
Yes.
How do you feel being thrust into such a devoted and passionate community?
It's been a fascinating experience because I have never experienced anything like this before in my life. And yet, it's still not the same experience that I think most of the regulars on From are going through. Because number one, they've all been doing it for 3 years, and they've got a huge social media following. I'm still the new kid on the block. And, I was in that one little short scene. And yeah, it's created a great furor, but most of that excitement was pretty short-lived. It happened when the episode was released, went on for a couple of weeks, and then it sort of died down. But with the diehard people out there, they're still always happy to chat with me when I show up online. They're always very happy to see me, and I've had a lot of fun kind of goofing around with them, because I'm not doing much right now, and I'm not writing with Marcia. I've got a lot of time on my hands, and because of the fact that I'm new to this, I don't have anywhere near the same number of people following me that follow, all the regulars on this series. My following is a drop in the bucket by comparison. So I've sort of been aware of all this excitement going on around me, but most of it, in fact, has been around me, not necessarily directed straight at me, which is one of the reasons why I've been able to engage with people, because there isn't that much of it, and I've got some time on my hands, and so I'm able to respond to people's messages, and they get so excited. It's like, oh my God, he wrote me back. And to me, it's like, well,
this guy, I know, I was one of them. That's why we're here. Like, it's all thanks to Julie. She mentioned that she was doing an interview with you, and I said, "Oh, that's so good." She's just like, "Why don't you ask?" And I'm just like, you won't reply back." And she's like, "Just go on Instagram and just do that." And I'm just like, "Oh, okay." I'm like, "I got to create an Instagram now." All right, I can do that. So I created an Instagram specifically to chat with you. My Instagram feed is just your feed, pretty much.
Well, my situation's not that different. I mean, I did have an Instagram account, and basically my followers were the same people on my Facebook account. It was about 150 friends, colleagues, that kind of thing, family. But I never used it because it was like, this is just like Facebook, except it's more work, so I never bothered with it. But then when this all happened, I knew that From had such a huge presence on there that I thought, okay, I got to up my game a little bit. So I went on, I posted a bunch of stuff to let people know I was there. And And yeah, the response was pretty immediate. It wasn't crazy, but I was surprised. It's like, oh yeah, a lot of people are really interested in this, and
Yeah, as
I
I
was
said, like
surprised too. Sorry.
it's a very big and avid, and I've been a part of a lot of fandoms and different sort of communities, but there's something about the Fromley that just hits different. There's so weird. There's almost no infighting. Like there's no we don't care that someone got an interview with so and so or something like that. When we found out that you were on Igor's channel, we were all cheering like this is the perfect person to interview. Like this will be great. He's going to ask all the questions that we wanted to know about stuff. And then with Julie, like you could have probably spoken to Julie for 10 hours. I mean, she's she's phenomenal, and with
I
Tony
probably
as
have
well.
spoken with
Yeah,
Julie for 10 hours because we
10
talk
hours. Yeah,
on Instagram all the time.
yeah, she's yeah. No, I jump on her streams for From and for we do a Severance show.
Uh-huh.
So not too sure if you've watched Severance, but it's
I
a
have no.
it's that good of a show that it changed my whole perception on Ben Stiller.
Hmm.
That he's now, if I find his name attached to something, I want to see what it is. Yeah, it's one of those career defining ones for someone who's already got a career.
Cool.
What I want to know is, looking ahead, what kind of legacy would you like to leave in the Canadian entertainment landscape? And are there any projects that you haven't yet to explore, or something that's coming up that excites you?
Well, there's I just landed a gig yesterday actually for something that's coming up, but I can't talk about it yet. It's only a day. It's kind of
I
like
know
fun.
it's just me and you know. It's just me and you. No one will hear.
Nice try. It has some similarities with the From gig in that it's the last scene of that. This is a limited series, and it's a very short but very impactful scene, and it's essentially a two-hander as that last scene
Yeah.
more or less was. So yeah, it's kind of a similar kind of thing. But aside from that, there's nothing on the boards at all, which is why my writing partner and I have the time to write together right now because there's nothing else going on. In terms of a legacy, it's a difficult question for me to answer because for me, when I decided to become an actor, we all have our different definitions of success. For me, I define success by being this: just working regularly as an actor, and doing interesting work, and as general as that sounds, that's really all that I'm after. That was the great thing that was so satisfying about being at Shaw. I got to do such a wide variety of Shaw's of genres, of periods, of accents, of styles. Like I got to be in musicals. I mean, it was all over the place, and I always felt like my muscles were being stretched. And to be able to do that and have a regular job as an actor, for me, that's as good as it gets. What's going to happen as a result of this? I'll tell you one thing I am concerned about. I hope. I mean, if this does end up being, a rather protracted role, the Man in Yellow, I hope that doesn't translate into me getting offered nothing but horror roles from this point on.
I've literally got the question highlighted on my thing. If this is a successful thing, do you feel like there's a chance that you're going to be typecast as like the big bad in everything, just to come in and it's like, oh, I know that guy. It's like, because talking to you now, you're as far from the Man in Yellow as it possibly can, and like you're a very happy, upbeat person, and yeah. So
One of the women that follows Igor, I have to tell you the story because it just killed me when I read this. He took our interview and he crafted a version of it with Russian subtitles because he has such a huge Russian language following, right? And so I went on to check that out one day, and there were all these comments from people, and it was all the usual, how could such a nice guy be playing such a villain kind of? But this woman said, "How can he be a villain? He's just a cinnamon bun." It was translated, of course, from the Russian, but I just thought, oh my God.
cinnamon bun. Well, I mean, good. I'm sure you've been called worse. So
indeed.
So,
but yeah, I mean, up until now, there hasn't been any through line in terms of the type of roles I've get. They've been all over the map, The only other horror thing I did, ironically, was about a year and a half ago. I shot a film here in Toronto, a little indie film called A Bloodline, and in which I played a vampire. but it wasn't your, I mean, yes, it had horror elements, but it wasn't your typical horror movie, just like From isn't your typical horror series. This was more a story of a guy who, we treated vampirism as a kind of addiction. And his daughter was kind of like his enabler. She's the one that kept him fed with blood to keep him alive, kind of thing. And it's a story about this guy who finally decides that in order for his daughter to have a life, he's going to have to sacrifice himself. And so he essentially commits suicide at the end of the film. That's the only other horror thing I've really ever done, aside from playing Dracula back when I was about 20, 21 years old. But, you know, that's never been a part of my career. It's never been something that I've had any particular interest in, quite frankly. I mean, the thing that fascinates me about From is not, in fact, the horror element. I mean, I understand why it's there and I appreciate the way it's handled. I'm far more interested in the characters and the relationships between the characters, and specifically how they all deal with this unbelievable trauma that they have to deal with. You know, that's the stuff that fascinates me. And yeah, the mystery box element of it is interesting too. But to me, that takes a backseat to just this fascinating group of people and this bizarre situation they're in, you know? So, I mean, if something else came along that was kind of similar, but was of this quality, yeah, I'd be happy to do it, you know?
This show has so many different layers to it. Like,
yes.
It's unlike Lost. I feel like Lost focused so much on the mystery and
Yes.
just the characters for a second, where this one is more character driven. And the creator has come out and said that this is a character driven show versus an element or a mystery box sort of one, because people were worried about that, because obviously with him working on Lost as well, there was going into, like you were saying about how there's so many different characters and everything that you played. Has there been a character that you portrayed that you've connected with on a really deeply emotional level?
Yes. Several, actually. The Man of No Importance was one of them, actually. Alfie, the
Alfie Byrne?
Yeah. That one resonated with me a lot, which is interesting because in a lot of ways we're very, very different people. But there was something about him. Yeah, he just felt in many ways like a kindred spirit to me. There was also a show that I did at Shaw. This was not for the public. This was a director's project. One of the guys in the company, one of the actors, decided he wanted to cut his teeth as a director. So he decided to direct an in-house production of a Terence Rattigan play called The Browning Version. It's a one-act play. And he did it the year that Christopher Newton was retiring from Shaw. And he did it with the mind of having Chris play the role. And Chris was like, no, I have to rehearse. No, so he turned it down. So then he asked another actor in the company and he turned it down. And then he came to me and said, would you like to read it? And I read this play. I said, are you kidding? I would kill to do this. And it was just one of those roles. It was incredibly emotionally demanding. It was a difficult role to do. But because I felt so close to this character, the deep emotion of it all, which is something that I normally have is a challenge for me, was not a problem at all with this. It all just kind of took care of itself. And I just felt like I'd been handed this phenomenal gift. I mean, we did 2 performances of it in front of a total of maybe 100 people, but it was one of the most satisfying, gratifying experiences I've ever had as an actor.
I like to end on a nice little fun note. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, and you're just going to tell me the story behind them.
Okay, sure. That sounds like a great fun.
Alrighty. So what's the story behind this picture?
I was in West Palm Beach, and I was doing a film. This was the first time in my career where I got to play a role of any size in a film project. It was a movie made for TV, produced by the CBC, that was directed by Adam McGoyan, that we shot back in 1992, called Gross Misconduct, based on a book of the same name. And it was a story about a guy who used to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, who was killed in a mugging years after he retired back in West Palm Beach in 1998, June of 1998. It's shot in 3 different locations. We shot up in the Arctic to begin with, up in Yukon, for some of the winter scenes. Then we shot a bunch of stuff in Toronto, and then we shot all of the Florida scenes down in West Palm Beach on location. In fact, the scene where he gets mugged at the end of the film took place at the very parking lot where he was killed.
Oh, wow.
So the woman in the picture with me there was playing this woman who he was living with at the time and who accused him of a murder. He was actually brought up on murder charges on the strength of her testimony. She was lying, and he got off eventually. But that's her name is Lenore Zan, and that's just us playing for the camera. And yes,
Yeah.
she's doing exactly what it looks like she's doing.
Okay, well, there goes the next question. Yep. And lastly, what's the story behind this one?
That was a production of Lend Me a Tenor. That was the year after Whose Underwear had premiered at the very same theater, the Muskoka Festival up in Gravenhurst, Ontario. And that was directed by Marcia's husband, Ron. And I was playing the bellhop in Lend Me a Tenor. So,
yeah. Oh, that is awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to just come and have a chat with a bloke on the other side of the planet. You know,
I love that. I love the fact that that's that we're separated by that incredible distance, and yet here we are side by side.
16 hours apart, but talking like we're in the same room.
Yeah, totally.
Alrighty then. Well, that'll be it for our show today. Make sure you stay tuned because I'll be releasing these in little shorts and a few snippets here and there. So on behalf of me, the wonderful Doug E. Hughes, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.